The year is 664 BC. The Nile runs black beneath a moonless sky, its waters whispering secrets older than the pyramids themselves. In the heart of Thebes, the city of 100 gates, a procession wins its way through the temple courtyards. Torches flicker against sandstone walls carved with the names of gods and kings. The air is thick with incense, sweat, and the low rhythmic chanting of priests. Tonight, the gods will be fed. Tonight, the veil between the living and the dead will thin. And tonight, in the shadow of the great temple, a group of young women kneel in silence, their heads bowed, their futures already written by hands not their own. They are the temple virgins chosen or perhaps condemned, from childhood to serve the gods of Egypt. To the outside world, they are symbols of purity, living offerings to Amun, Isis, Hath. Their families boast of their daughter's selection, believing it an honor, a path to divine favor. But behind the temple walls, the truth is far more complicated, far more terrifying. Because what the priests did to these girls was not worship, it was something far darker, something that would haunt the Nile for centuries. If you think you know the secrets of ancient Egypt, think again. If you believe that the past is just a collection of dusty relics and faded myths, you're about to discover a story that was buried for a reason. Because what happened to the temple virgins was not just a crime against the body, it was a crime against the soul. And the priests who orchestrated it did so in the name of gods who demanded silence. Let's begin. In the world of ancient Egypt, the temple was everything. It was the center of the city, the heart of the cosmos, the axis around which life and death revolved. The priests who ruled these sacred spaces wielded power greater than any pharaoh. They were the keepers of secrets, the interpreters of omens, the mediators between mortals and the divine. And at the center of their rituals stood the temple virgins, girls taken from their families, stripped of their names, and remade as vessels for the gods. The selection process was brutal. Every year, the priests would scour the villages along the Nile, searching for girls of a certain age, a certain beauty, a certain innocence. The chosen ones were paraded through the streets, their hair shorn, their bodies anointed with oils. Their parents wept with pride and fear, knowing that they would never see their daughters again. For the girls, there was no choice, no escape, no hope. The temple doors closed behind them, and the world they had known vanished forever. Inside the temple, the rules were absolute. The virgins were forbidden to speak, forbidden to laugh, forbidden to remember the lives they had left behind. They slept on stone floors, ate meager rations, and spent their days in endless rituals of purification. Every morning they bathed in cold water drawn from the sacred lake, their skin scrubbed raw by older attendants. Every night, they knelt before the altar, reciting prayers in a language they barely understood. Their bodies were not their own. Their thoughts were not their own. They belonged to the gods and to the priests who claimed to speak for them. But the rituals of purity were only the beginning. As the months passed, the true nature of their service became clear. The priests, cloaked in linen and authority, would visit the virgins' quarters under cover of darkness. They spoke in whispers, their faces hidden by the flickering light of oil lamps. They brought gifts, bread, honey, amulets carved with the names of forgotten deities. At first, the girls were grateful for the attention, desperate for any kindness in a world of stone and silence. But soon, the gifts became demands, the kindness became threats. The line between worship and violation blurred, then disappeared. The priests claimed that the gods required more than prayers. They required sacrifice not of animals, but of innocence. The virgins were told that their bodies were altars, that their suffering would bring prosperity to the land, that their silence was a form of worship. To refuse was to invite the wrath of the gods, to doom one's family to famine and disease. The girls learned to obey, to endure, to disappear inside themselves. Some broke, some rebelled. All were punished. The punishments were as creative as they were cruel. A girl who spoke out of turn would be denied food for days. A girl who wept during rituals would be locked in a dark cell, her only company the scorpions that crawled through the cracks in the stone. A girl who tried to escape would be paraded through the temple, her shame made public, her body marked with the priest's knife. The message was clear: you are nothing, you are no one, you exist only to serve. But the worst was yet to come. Every year, during the festival of Opit, the temple virgins played a central role in the rituals that renewed the king's power and the land's fertility. The city erupted in celebration music, dancing, feasting. But inside the temple, the atmosphere was one of dread. The virgins were dressed in white linen, their faces painted with ochre and kohl. They were led to the inner sanctum, where only the high priests and the most trusted acolytes were allowed to enter. What happened next was never recorded in the official histories. The priests swore oaths of secrecy, and the girls who survived rarely spoke of it. But fragments of the truth have survived in letters smuggled out by sympathetic scribes, in the graffiti scratched into the walls of abandoned temples, in the nightmares that haunted the survivors for the rest of their lives. The rituals were a mockery of purity. The virgins were forced to participate in acts that defiled their bodies and shattered their spirits. The priests claimed that these acts were necessary to ensure the favor of the gods, to guarantee the flooding of the Nile, to protect Egypt from its enemies. But the truth was simpler and far more horrifying. The priests did it because they could. because power, unchecked and unquestioned, always seeks new ways to assert itself. The temple walls, once symbols of divine protection, became silent witnesses to unspeakable acts. The stone absorbed the cries that could not be uttered, the prayers that turned to pleas for mercy, the hope that withered in the darkness. The virgins, once celebrated as living bridges to the gods, became shadows moving through the corridors with downcast eyes, their voices stolen, their innocence bartered for the promise of a good harvest or a king's continued reign. Outside, the city of Thebes thrived. Merchants haggled in the markets, children played along the riverbanks, and the priests paraded through the streets in their gold and linen, revered by all. No one dared question the rituals that took place behind the temple's closed doors. To do so was to risk the wrath of the gods, or worse, the priests themselves. The myth of purity was maintained at all costs, and the suffering of the virgins was buried beneath layers of ritual and tradition. But the truth could not be hidden forever. Whispers began to circulate among the temple servants or women who swept the floors, young boys who carried water, scribes who copied sacred texts late into the night. They saw the bruises that never healed, the haunted eyes, the girls who vanished without explanation. Some tried to help, smuggling scraps of food or whispered words of comfort. Most simply looked away, powerless in the face of the priest's authority. For the virgins, survival became an act of resistance. They learned to read the moods of the priests, to anticipate their demands, to hide their pain behind masks of obedience. Some formed secret bonds, sharing what little comfort they could offer each other. Touch, a glance, a memory of home. In the darkest hours, they clung to the hope that the gods were not blind, that justice would come, if not in this life, then in the next. But hope was a dangerous thing. The priests understood this and they worked tirelessly to extinguish it. They told the virgins that their suffering was a privilege, that their pain was a gift to the gods, that their silence was the highest form of devotion. They twisted the language of faith into a weapon, turning prayers into chains, rituals into punishments, worship into submission. The psychological torment was relentless. The girls were forced to confess imagined scenes, to beg forgiveness for thoughts they had never had, to accept blame for the failings of the harvest or the illness of a priest. They were told that their bodies were unclean, that their thoughts were dangerous, that their very existence was a threat to the order of the cosmos. Over time, many came to believe it. They internalized the shame, the guilt, the sense of worthlessness. They became complicit in their own oppression, policing each other, reporting transgressions, enforcing the rules that kept them captive. Yet even in this atmosphere of fear and control, small acts of rebellion persisted. A girl who refused to cry out during punishment, another who carved her name into the stone beneath her sleeping mat, a silent declaration that she had existed, that she had not been erased. These acts were dangerous, and the consequences were severe, but they were also necessary, a reminder that the priests could not claim everything, that some part of the self could survive, even in the darkest place. The annual festivals were the most dangerous time of all. The city's attention was focused on the temple, and the priests were under pressure to deliver miracles, rain, fertility, victory in battle. The virgins became scapegoats for any failure, their bodies offered up as sacrifices to appease the gods and the crowds alike. The rituals grew more elaborate, more violent, more humiliating. The line between religious ceremony and sadistic spectacle blurred, then vanished. Some girls did not survive. Their names were erased from the temple records, their families told that they had been chosen for a higher purpose, that they had ascended to the company of the gods. In truth, they were buried in unmarked graves, their stories lost to time. Others survived, but at a terrible cost. They emerged from the temple broken, unable to speak of what had happened, haunted by memories that would never fade. The priests, for their part, felt no guilt. They believed themselves to be instruments of the divine, above the laws of men, answerable only to the gods. They justified their actions with scripture, with tradition, with the unassailable logic of power. And the city, desperate for order and prosperity, allowed it to continue. But the world was changing. New ideas were beginning to seep into Egypt from the east and the west, ideas about justice, about the value of the individual, about the limits of power. Some priests resisted, clinging to the old ways with increasing desperation. Others saw the writing on the wall and began to distance themselves from the most extreme practices, quietly releasing some virgins, softening the rituals, rewriting the histories. Still, the damage had been done. The legacy of the temple virgins was one of silence, of suffering, of lives stolen in the name of gods who demanded too much. Their stories, when they surfaced, were dismissed as rumors, as slander, as the fantasies of the weak. But the truth lingered, like a stain on the temple stones, impossible to wash away. And in the quiet moments, when the chanting had faded and the torches had burned low, the priests themselves sometimes wondered if the gods were truly pleased, or if they had simply become monsters in the service of monsters. Centuries later, when the temples of Thebes lay in ruins and the gods of Egypt had been replaced by new faiths, travelers and scholars would wander through the shattered halls, running their hands over the faded carvings and wondering what secrets the stones still held. Some would find traces, scratched names, half-erased prayers, fragments of jewelry buried in the dust. Most would see only the grandeur, the majesty, the illusion of a civilization that had mastered life and death. Few would sense the suffering that had been woven into every block, every column, every shadowed corner. But the stories survived, passed down in whispers, in the memories of families who had lost daughters to the temple, in the nightmares of those who had escaped. They spoke of girls who had been chosen for greatness and found only pain, of priests who had claimed to serve the gods but had served only themselves, of rituals that promised salvation and delivered only silence. They spoke of the price of power and the cost of obedience, and the terrible things that can happen when faith is twisted into fear. For the survivors, life after the temple was a different kind of exile. Some were released when they grew too old to serve, sent back to families who no longer recognized them, who saw only strangers where daughters had once been. Others fled, vanishing into the labyrinth of the city, changing their names, hiding their scars. A few found the courage to speak, to tell their stories to anyone who would listen. Most remained silent, their voices lost in the endless procession of history. Yet, even in silence, they left their mark. The graffiti carved into the temple walls, the amulets hidden in the cracks, the prayers whispered in the dark were acts of defiance, small flames of memory that refused to be extinguished. Over time, these fragments would be pieced together by those who came after, scholars and seekers who refused to accept the official histories, who looked beyond the monuments and the myths to find the truth. And the truth was this: what the Egyptian priests did to the temple virgins was worse than death. It was the theft of self, the erasure of identity, the transformation of living girls into living offerings, their bodies and souls consumed by a system that demanded everything and gave nothing in return. It was a crime that could not be punished, a wound that could not be healed, a darkness that lingered long after the last torch had gutted out. But even in the face of such horror, there was resistance. There were girls who refused to break, who held on to their names, their memories, their hope. There were servants who risked everything to offer comfort, scribes who smuggled out letters, families who never stopped searching for the truth. There were moments of kindness, of solidarity, of courage, small, fragile, but real. And in the end, it was these moments that endured, outlasting the priests, the temples, even the gods themselves. The story of the temple virgins is not just a tale of suffering. It is a warning, a lesson, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and unquestioned faith. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the capacity for survival in the face of unimaginable cruelty. It is a call to remember those who were silenced, to honor their memory, to refuse to let their stories be buried beneath the weight of tradition and time. So as you listen to the echoes of the past, as you walk through the ruins and read the names carved in stone, remember the girls who knelt in the shadow of the altar, who endured what no one should endure, who found ways to survive even when survival seemed impossible. Remember that history is not just the story of kings and priests and gods, but of those who suffered in silence, who resisted in secret, who left behind traces for us to find. And remember, too, that the darkness of the past is never as far away as we think. The systems that allowed such cruelty to flourish have not vanished. They have only changed their names, their faces, their rituals. The temptation to sacrifice the vulnerable in the name of tradition, of faith, of power, is as old as civilization itself. The only antidote is memory and the courage to speak the truth, even when it is dangerous, even when it is painful. What the Egyptian priests did to the temple virgins was worse than death, but the girls endured. They left behind more than suffering. They left behind a lesson, a warning, a light that still shines in the darkness. And as long as we remember, as long as we refuse to look away, their voices will not be lost. If this story moves you, if it reminds you of the cost of silence and the value of memory, let it live on. Share it, speak it. Refuse to let the final word belong to those who would bury the truth. Because history is not just what happened, it is what we choose to remember. Asterisk.